and there was these 10-year-old boys, and I was just naively riding my bike up, and they stopped me and said, "Yeah, nice bike." And I said, "It's a pretty sweet bike. It's got some nice little tassels. I don't know if you've seen the training wheels. They're pretty good for like going around corners." And they said to me, "Yeah, it's a girl's bike." And I said, "How is it possibly a girl's bike?" And they said, "Mate, it's a pink Power Rangers bike." And I looked down, and they were exactly right. And I'm not sure if you can see this, but that was my very first bicycle. And I remember riding it back to Mum, just with tears in my eyes. And I remember just throwing it down and being like, "I'm never riding that again." And she's like, "What do you mean you love that?" And I was like, "Yeah, but it's a pink Power Rangers bike. Didn't you know that?" And from that moment onwards, I learned for my own identity that wasn't to be associated with something that was pink, that was Power Rangery, that was girly, that was emotive, or that was vulnerable. Now, transition 6 years later, on my very first day at the senior school at Knox Grammar, and the Year 12 area, which looks a little bit different now, I was pretty adamant on making the boys in my group know that I was a masculine dude. And I remember making a deal with a few of my mates who actually still work here in the gym today, and saying, "I bet you I can run the gauntlet in the Year 12 area and no one will catch you." And they said, "Righto, we'll bet you a jam and cream roll was the thing back in the day." And I remember going, I've got it. And I remember just taking off and sprinting. 5 steps, a soccer ball hit me straight in the face, and I just dropped to the ground. And I remember walking back to the boys, and they're like, "Are you crying, mate?" I said, "Absolutely not. No." Again, another moment for me to prove to the boys that that didn't even hurt. Fast forward to Year 9, another 2 years. I was doing a pretty good job at not being myself. I modelled my identity and my masculinity on 4 things: being big and fast and strong, making heaps of money, getting heaps of girls, and never showing any emotion. And what was celebrated around me was, that's a pretty good Aussie bloke if you can do that. That was the naivety of the bubble I lived in. In Year 9, I was invited to my very first training session with the first 15. And I was young for my year, so I was 14 years old at the time. I absolutely believed that I would play professional rugby. I'd had conversations with the Manly Seagulls, with their under-16 squad. I had to put my whole identity wrapped around being a professional sportsman. I thought I had it all made for me. Then there's one weekend when I was finally old enough to play the New South Wales First Country Games in that junior level, and we're playing our school game against Waverley, where we were both undefeated, going for the premiership. And my club rugby coach, I was playing for the Warringah Tigers at the time, rang me up on Friday afternoon and said to me, "Hey mate, we're short of a few players. We're playing a team called Hunters Hill. Is there any chance that you could show up and just help us out?" And I thought, you know what, mate, I'm not really comfortable with that. But huge weekend of footy, no thanks. And he said to me, "Come on, mate, you're one of the boys, do it for the boys." Again, that call to action to be one of the boys. And so I turned up to the game, and it was horizontal rain. It was literally, I'm pretty sure it was hailing. And I rocked up and I shook the opposing captain's hand who played for Hunters Hill. And he was this 6'4" Tongan dude who looked like he ate babies for breakfast. And here I was, this prepubescent 14-year-old boy, just going, "Oh my goodness." And they kicked the ball off and I caught it. And usually I would have kicked it back, playing a bit of club footy, but I decided to run it. And I somehow stepped and got through everyone. And it was just me and the fullback. And I went to go and do one of those side steps where you're not looking. And just went bang, straight into my opposing captain. His knee went in my shin and my leg broke. And this was within the first 10 seconds of the game. So my mum was an hour and a half out of Sydney in the Blue Mountains. They called the ambulance once. They said, "It's not life-threatening, it's all right, he'll be fine, just carry him off." They called the ambulance twice. The ambulance said the same thing. They called the ambulance 4 times before they turned up. My mum managed to get from the Blue Mountains to Hunters Hill before the ambulance at Royal North Shore got to the Oval. During this time, the only thing they could give me was a stick to bite on, and I had people's like Gordon footy tracksuits rubbed over me. And I remember getting to the hospital, and I was completely out of it. I just remember being really vague. And I saw this kid next to me, and I kind of just remember blacking out. And Mum said she saw this kid who was sucking on this green morphine stick, having the absolute time of his life. And he'd just broken his leg. And then there was me, I was actually going as green as the morphine stick in my face. And very fortunately, my uncle's an orthopaedic surgeon in London, and she called him up and said, this is the situation, we don't know what to do, it's almost midnight, I'm pretty worried. And the doctor said, we're going to operate on Hunter tomorrow morning. And Mum said, she's still to this day saying it's the mother's intuition, and she goes, something just wasn't right. And so she called up my uncle, and he said, there's a guy called Dr. Stephen Ruff. Mum's like, that is not a great name to ask you, doctor, but we'll go with it. And he just finished a 12-hour shift. He was driving out of the hospital and turned around and came back in. And he took one look at my leg and said, there's a 5% chance you have something called compartment syndrome, where the bone breaks inwards and it punctures the muscle. The muscle will expand for 4 hours before it strangles itself, and the leg will die, and then Hunter will die. So, how long's it been? The mum looked at it and said, well, it's almost midnight and the game started at 8:15, so it's 3 hours and 45 minutes. And he said, all right, well, we've got to operate straight away. So we went into the operating theatre, and the orthopaedic surgeons just looked at bone, and they saw that I'd severely broken my leg. And actually, I've got a photo, I'll show you. I don't know if you can see. You can't really see. Alright, we can't. It was bad, I promise. The bone, both the tib and fib had broken and punctured the muscle. But what the orthopaedic surgeons didn't see was that when the bone had broken, that it actually severed the main artery going to the leg. And if that wasn't detected, I would have internally bled to death. And it was just by chance that there was a guy who's a plastic surgeon from India in the room. Sure, come in. And he'd seen that was the case. So they had cut down the size of my leg and let the blood drain out for 3 days. The pressure in my leg, well, the pressure in your leg, to put this in context, is usually 7. Mine was 84. And they compare this to motorbike accidents because the collision is so intense. Make a long story short, it ended up being a metal rod, 4 screws, 6 operations, 2 skin grafts, 2 blood transfusions, but the worst was you're never going to be able to run again. And here I was, this kid who moulded his whole identity around playing for the first 15, being one of the boys, you know, making heaps of money, getting heaps of girls. And suddenly I had this ripped away from me. And it was the first time in my life that I actually felt helpless and I felt vulnerable. And that word vulnerable to me at the time meant being weak, being really, really weak. So I can't be seen as being vulnerable. But what I learned over those next 2 months of playing a lot of FIFA was that as my body stopped going, my brain actually started to get going. And I dived into concepts like this thing called emotional intelligence. And I was left with a comment from my grandpa who said to me, you know, if you were that good at sport, imagine if you could push that energy into something a little more meaningful. And at the time, that's pretty hard to take in because I felt like my whole life had been ripped away from me. You know, I was building up to play for the first 15. And I don't usually share this part of the story, but the really challenging thing is that I didn't let my friends know how bad this was. I just told them that it was a normal broken leg because I didn't want them to know that I was weak or I was vulnerable. But something deep down inside of me, that mask that I was wearing had just been ripped off. And the first time in my life, I was left with what I thought was nothing. And that actually kick-started the journey as to who I am today. But it was actually someone really close to me who played an even bigger role in my life. He really showed me what courage was. And it's this kid, he was about 5 years old, and I saw him walking down the street, and he had this shaved head and this mohawk that was just up there. Everyone on the street was just looking and going, who is this kid? And he was just cruising along. He did not care at all. Fast forward another 3 years, that kid has just seen his sister getting severely bullied for having dyslexia. His sister, the girls, she was 9 years old at the time, the girls in her group at school would say, you can come in our group if you can spell this word. And at the time, she was 9 years old, was coming home and crying at recess, coming home before first class even started. And Saxon is his name. He flipped the situation and said, well, instead of us, going to the school and them not doing anything about it, instead of us going to the bullies and them not doing anything about it, how about we flip this model and let's make Indy, is her name, do something for herself. Let's flip the model. Let's empower her instead of her being, the victim. So Saxon walked out the front, set up a lemonade stand, and raised $34 and donated it to a young girl's reading Ready Disability charity called the Indigo Express Foundation. That foundation has now raised over $300,000 for other kids in need, particularly with a focus on young Indigenous girls. And that same kid, Saxon, was the same kid, he's 11 now, just asked Julia Gillard last year when she was speaking at the Opera House why she didn't let gay people get married. Pretty ballsy. Then that kid just copped his first punch 3 weeks ago from Saxon's 11, so he's in year 6. Copped his first punch from a year 11 boy who's 17 at school. The kid walked past him and said, "Hey mate, nice hair." Saxon said, "Yeah, it's pretty sweet." He goes, "Yeah, it's pretty gay." And Saxon said, "What's gay about it?" He goes, "Well, you've got it." Saxon goes, "Righto." The kid just punched him straight in the face. To me, that is true leadership. To me, that is true courage. To me, that is true vulnerability, to have the confidence in yourself to stand up for what you believe in, no matter what. I'm very fortunate Saxon's actually my 11-year-old little brother. So I get to hang out with him at dinner, and he tells me stories like that. It makes me really evaluate what I'm doing in my life. But again, it ties into that element of vulnerability. So we're here talking about this whole concept of entrepreneurship. Does anyone actually know what an entrepreneur is? Yo. Cool. Thank you for going first as well. Does anyone know what a social entrepreneur is? Do you know?
Someone who starts a business for social benefits.
If you say it a bit louder, it's really smart.
Someone who starts a business for social benefits.
Amazing. And that's what we're going to be talking about with this $20 Boss program. I was really scared of starting a business, particularly a business with a social lens. But there's lessons that I learned from Saxon that really kick-started my journey into the entrepreneurship space. So I run a program which is called The Man Cave. To put this in context actually, can I get you to raise your hand if you know someone in your life, whether it be a parent, a friend, a brother, a sister, or someone close to you that you've seen struggle with depression? Awesome. Thank you very much. It is now a national epidemic that 1 in 5 young Australians will suffer a diagnosable mental health disorder before they're 15. Suicide is the leading cause of death for young guys under the age of 25. And we talk about these issues as being the problems, but what we've dived into in the Man Cave is they're not actually the problem, they're the symptom of a bigger problem at hand. Because as young guys, we have, if we run down the street and we trip over, we go to the medicine cabinet, we put on our Band-Aid. But where do we go to deal with the everyday emotional cuts and scrapes? Dealing with loneliness, trauma, guilt, disrespect, rejection, or how this is transferred through our family. We don't have an emotional toolkit. And what we're seeing now as a result of that young guys, because they're putting on this mask from a really young age, similar to the situation that I had with my pink Power Rangers bike, is that we wear this mask until it gets ripped off and we don't have the tools to do anything about it. So the Man Cave is a personal project of mine. We've now worked with over 750 young boys across Australia. What we do is deconstruct the idea of what it means to be a man and where that comes from historically, and also what the role the media plays in that. If you look at, I'll tell you actually, the first time I got my heart broken was a guy called Andrew Johns. Anyone remember Andrew Johns? Does anyone know who Andrew Johns is? After I broke my leg, Andrew Johns sent me a video message, and he said to me, "Mate, I'm so sorry. I know we've been training together, but I really, really back you, and I really believe in you." And that meant a lot to me, and I watched that almost daily. 3 weeks later, Andrew Johns got caught out for taking drugs. That literally shattered my world. A guy that I'd idolised, that we actually still put on TV, is still allowed to be sharing, his story because he said, "Sorry, that's enough." That rocked my world. So what we're doing in the Man Cave is bringing to fruition young guys who have the confidence and capability to support each other, to feel connected, to understand what courage is, to understand that vulnerability is actually power. So what we do is we dive into this idea of being a man. We dive into emotional intelligence and the lack of emotional intelligence associated with things like domestic violence, substance abuse, and mental health. And then we provide young boys with an emotional toolkit such as mindfulness, basic self-awareness, and meditation and social connection to guide that transition from boy to adult. We do this activity with the boys where we throw it out to them saying, it's all good for us to talk about this. It's an amazing experience. We're all talking about it, but let's put our money where our mouth is. We'll throw an activity out to them called "If You Really Knew Me, You'd Know," and they have to turn to the boy next to them, someone who they may have never spoke to in their life, and say, "If you really knew me, you'd know I actually really like dancing. I really like hanging out with my mum on the weekends." And we threw this out to them, and they had to turn to the person next to them, share it, then they went to the person on the other side of the room and shared it, and then we invited them up to the front to share that if you really knew me, you'd know. And this kid was sitting probably around where you guys are sitting. He was really nervous, and I said, this is your last chance to take that leap of faith. Do something. We can change the culture. We can create the culture in this room that we want. We get the leadership we reward. We can change the culture for an hour, but we can't change the culture in an hour. So let's try it. Let's take a leap of faith. And this kid just goes, yeah, I'll go. He came up the front and he said, so I'm 16. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And it's rattled my life with anxiety and depression ever since. And I've always wanted to tell my peers and my teachers, but I've never had the opportunity to do so. But I figured now is as good as any chance to do that. And the whole room stood up and just clapped him. That kid came up to me afterwards and said, that was by far the most liberating and empowering experience of my life. I said, look, mate, you're just the bravest guy in the room, but what made that so powerful? And he said that it's because of the boys. They stood up and they clapped me, which kind of meant that I was okay in just being me. And again, tying back into that courage to be brave and to be yourself. So, part of my journey is also tied in with an organisation called the Foundation for Young Australians. Just out of pure curiosity, has anyone heard of the Foundation for Young Australians? You should totally check it out. It is an organisation that is solely dedicated and designed by young people, for young people. And what we do is we think there's 4 key areas to empower you guys, to give you the tools, the skills and the capabilities to shape Australia's future. The 4 areas that we operate in is giving young people enterprising skills, so $20 Boss program. We back young entrepreneurs, so we just had 52 young social entrepreneurs come through our program where we developed their business models, their leadership skills, their networks, and then they pitched for up to $100,000 in funding to kickstart their business. We work in the Asia Pacific region to engage in Asia literacy. So fun fact is there's 4.3 million young people in Australia. There's 750 million young people in the Asia Pacific region. So it's around building that Asia literacy. And the 4th area is we back young people in rural and remote communities. So we run a number of Indigenous programs in the Northern Territory and also Australia's largest Indigenous Leadership Academy. But the reason we do what we do is because the world of work which you guys are about to inherit is going to be the craziest world that we've ever been in. So some really gnarly stats for you is that 30% of young people are unemployed or underemployed. So that means young people who are looking for a job are unable to find that work. That equals to a crazy $790 million that's lost each year. But have you guys heard a lot of people, particularly politicians, talking about the ageing population? Yeah? Have you heard many people talking about the younger generation that's going to inherit that ageing population? So with that 30% underemployment rate, means we're going to have a larger Asian population with a smaller workforce that's actually going to have to support them, which means that we've got to have more skills than ever before. Second reason why programs such as $20 Boss are so important is that 44% of jobs are going to be automated by computers in the next 20 years. 44% of jobs, which is crazy. Programs like the $20 Boss can help you think critically, they can help you think entrepreneurially, can help you think innovatively, can help with your financial literacy so you can understand the logistics of money and how it works. And most importantly, they give you the courage to stand up and shape the Australia you want to see. So we're super, super excited to be running this program with you. $20 Boss, just to recap what is actually involved, is a microloan of $20 for you guys throughout the month of August to September. You have a month to generate at least $1 interest. With that dollar interest, you have a choice of whether to give it back to a charity or back to the program. And the really, really exciting thing I find about this program is that you guys are about to go into this world of work, and no longer do you have to choose between doing well financially and doing good socially as 2 mutually exclusive things. they're actually very much the same now. It's a really exciting opportunity for you guys. The last thing which I think I'll leave you with is that you are the generation that is going to inherit this country. And programs like this, we've seen some amazing, amazing case studies. One really cool one is a suburb in Sydney called Granville, where the kids at school noticed that there were a lot of violence, a lot of bullying in their school playground. But they saw that if they noticed the kids were coming to school with no food. And so they took a $500 grant from pulling their money together and set up their own cafeteria run by kids for kids. And the result of that is the bullying severely decreased. There was actually a stabbing involved at the school, and they recouped, and the violence completely decreased. So the opportunity for you guys to make this yours is super, super amazing. I've also heard pretty cool case studies which Georgie will be able to share with you in a minute, of kids making up to $1,000 in that month. So thank you so much for letting me share my story with you. If you have any questions, I'd love to throw it out to you, and George can answer any more questions.
I'll do another thanks for Hunter and Georgie in a moment. If you've got any questions about the $20 boss in particular, or anything else, in terms of vulnerability and taking the mask off, please ask now. Otherwise, both Georgie and Hunter will be available to answer some questions on the way out. They have some phenomenal case studies of what's happened before. Would anyone like to, Wesley and George, got a question for us?
Who has been the most successful in the program?
Yeah, awesome. So we ran the program as a pilot last year. We had about 400 students across Victoria in about 10 different schools participating. We had students, as Hunter said, a couple of them raised up to $1,000 each in a 3-week period, which is pretty phenomenal in running any sort of business. A couple of their ideas, some of them are really good in graphics, and they created a comic, and they sold the comic. The comic had a social and environmental purpose in that they were in a rural school, and they saw there was a problem around animal abuse in their town, especially from young people, like street dogs and stuff like that. And so they created a comic book raising awareness of animal abuse and sold it, within their town and within their school, and they raised $1,000, which was pretty awesome.
This is $20. When you start your business, you have to put the social and environmental impact incorporate that, or?
Yeah, so we recommend that somehow you think about your social and environmental impact within the program. So it can be quite simple if you're, buying products. We saw a group of students last year go to their local St Vincent de Paul, buy a box of t-shirts from there, restyle them, tie-dye them, and resell them.
So that's recycling, that's upcycling, that's considering your environmental impact in your business. I don't know if you've got heaps of sort of examples of how you can do that, how you can consider your social impact within just even a small business. Sourcing locally, recycling, all of that encompasses social environmental